Craig, good morning. Thanks for calling us this morning.
Good morning, Dave, Rob.
Hey, did you take a sleeping bag and spend the night in the Capitol to get a seat like that, or you just?
He's got seniority, man. He's big time. Yeah. Blair's big time, baby.
Hey,
I'm not answering that question.
Hey, by the way, we did have a beautiful young lady on the air with us yesterday who happens to be very articulate and happened to even admit during her interview that she thinks like her father. How about that?
On occasion, she said.
On occasion, I think like my father.
Sorry about her luck there, too.
So what did you like and what didn't you like about the presentation last night?
Well, I like the fact that there wasn't any teleprompter and that he spoke off the cuff. Other than that, I think it's just a terrible missed opportunity again for us to reorganize, reset state government. $26.6 million in budget cuts isn't going to cut it. There is no desire to vote for higher taxes in the state of West Virginia unless we can see at least $250 million, and I think it probably even higher than that, in reforms. Look, as I've been sitting here talking to you guys on the phone, or listening to you guys on the phone while I've been on Hawaii, I sat and took the numbers of the per-student funding for Shepherd University versus WVU and Marshall and came up with $26 million. Just taking their funding per student down to the same funding that the students Shepherd gets per student for them. Now, what's good, Shepherd gets $3,087 per student. WVU gets $3,621. Marshall gets $3,981. West Virginia Institute of Technology gets $7,216. If Shepherd can do it with one price, so can all the rest of them. And let me just go one step further on this. We can actually find $200 to $300 million in cuts, and the way you go about doing it is higher ed, and you cut them free from the restraints that being tied into the state government, of whether it be PEIA, how they pay their teachers, how they insure their teachers, how they insure the institution, things like that. There are packages out here. We're working with that right now with the osteopathic school to set them into the stage of being a not-for-profit, and that unwinds $7 million. All these fairs and festivals, I think I've got public sector sponsors for that. That's $3.8 million. So we're not going to take and go along with these huge tax increases, but it's rather disappointing because Nick Casey had said on Hoppy's show, and I had talked to him, and we heard the same thing, that the governor was going to produce, $395 million to $606 million in cuts. And, well, we got that in an alternative plan for $450 that I can look at, and all that is drawing contrast to the fact that they really didn't put forward any significant cuts.
I think that a lot of people, and Dave pointed it out early this morning, Craig, kind of felt betrayed this morning when they read the governor's speech. If they didn't, unless they got a chance to actually see it or watch it, to hear whatever last night, maybe they felt it last night. But here's a fellow who had earlier said that he really had a distaste for increasing taxes. And how could you increase that much taxes in this state and put a burden on people already who are mostly struggling? And then he went and did it last night anyway. And I'm frankly, I'm listening to that speech last night and watching it in the chamber, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm not really sure that's the reason why people voted for this guy. I don't think that people voted for a guy who was going to raise taxes to the tune of $450 million with only $27 million in cuts. I think that a lot of people were thinking, look, we've got a declining population. We probably don't need as many people in the state bureaucracy as we did 20 years ago. Where are those cuts? Why aren't we thinning the herd there? The first thing that he talked about is let's close the parks, let's defund the colleges not named WVU or Marshall. That's the The PR stuff, right? Yeah, exactly. That's always the easy stuff.
This is what we heard in years past. Fact of the matter is that I didn't feel betrayed because I didn't vote for him, but I did feel disappointed. Okay, I'd only feel betrayed if I voted for him. But the fact is that he is our governor, and we want to succeed and work together. But again, it's the same dance. But I can assure you that we're far more prepared this year than what we were last year when we got boxed in with different revenue estimates. I noticed in today's newspaper, because I've got Darrell Coles has got a piece of legislation, and I've got a similar piece in the Senate side that makes it so that your revenue estimates for your budget can be no more than the revenues collected the previous year. And this song and dance of expecting to get $600 million when you know that you just come off of a budget year where you came in $700 million less doesn't work. That's voodoo economics, and we can't be playing that.
You know what amazes me, Senator, is that this is outrageous. I mean, I'm just going to lay it down here. This was an outrageous presentation in multiple levels. And one of them is that the total misread that he has, of, I think, the West Virginia electorate, the population as a whole. And in more finitely or specifically was the misread of both chambers of the legislature, who he must have known was going to look at this proposal that he laid out last night with disdain. How could he be so far removed from the political reality of both the people that he pretends to serve and the legislature with whom he needs as partners to pass something?
I can't tell you that. You know, there were more euphemisms in his speech than what there was context of what we needed to do to fix the state of West Virginia. I expected more. Yep, you're right. I had a front row seat and again, my disappointment is immense. And what I'm more worried about than anything is that we're going to provide the solutions necessary to be able to address, right-size our government, reset it, and make it so that it works for all, and do the things that are essential. But how do you go out and give the $450 million in tax increases without any type of tax reform whatsoever? And then, here's the interesting part. Our sales tax collections are down significantly. That's because people don't have any money to spend. And you want to go to the well again and ask for more money? You want to attack businesses that are so just barely able to survive, and you want to, well, it's only 0.2%. Well, that mounts up if you do $1 million in gross sales. That mounts up. That's $2,000.
Maybe he was brilliant last night, because maybe what they're doing is they're laying a trap for you. And the trap is, if I put out a budget like this to this Republican legislature, and then I say, okay, well, I've put my plan out there. Now let's compromise. Let's somewhere meet in the middle. Because now that will seem reasonable to most people. Hey, the governor's meeting us in the middle, meeting the Republicans in the middle on this. And what he gets out of that then, he gets the tax increases, but he gets the Republican buy-in, not for $400 million, but maybe for $200 million. What do you think?
Well, the buy-in's going to be is we're already working on tax reform where we're going to eliminate income tax and then do a sales tax change to where we don't have 64 exemptions anymore. And that is very much so in the process right now. We are setting a course with Mike Carl is helping with this. And WVU and Marshall, they're scoring it, and we're getting it in place to put real tax reform and bring our state in line with others. And I said others, not others, but other successful states.
So to go to a model that puts forward more of a consumption kind of tax, which we don't have presently, that would be true tax reform. But does that kind of tax reform result in the urgent situation of solving the budget gap that you need to do in the next, I would think, in the next 2.5 months?
Absolutely, it can do that, and the reason for it is that the sales tax can be put in place on July the 1st to start with, the modifications to that, and then you can't do the income tax to the end of the year, and that gives you an opportunity to come up with an additional $250 million one-time revenue.
Well, that tells me, I mean, and you might absolutely, no one has more respect for Mike Carl's tax acumen than I do, and no one has more respect for your commitment, Craig, to tax reform and lower taxes generally than you do. So let's say you go down that road, but what it says to me is that people like Craig Blair and your fellow senators on that form the majority in the state Senate couldn't be on further planets than you would be with the governor on this. It's almost, how do you get into the room and have the first conversation?
Wait, well, I don't know what you're talking about. He said last night that he wants to eliminate the income tax. That was on his whiteboard. Okay?
Yeah, that's true. So there's your starting point then.
Yes. I think that we both have the same goals. I just don't think that the governor was willing to take the political hit on going out here and redefining our government, reorganizing our government. And he's the one I would relish the opportunity to be in his position and to be able to get our government straightened out for the people of West Virginia, so that, yes, are we going to be in tough times for the next year or two? Yes, we are. There's no question about that. How we behave and what we do with our state government during these next couple of years is going to redefine the state of West Virginia, not for just the next 2 years, but for literally decades into the future. And, somebody brought this up the other day. Our Capitol building is one of the nicest in the country. And when it was built, we were ranked like 8th or 9th state-wise in the country. And the reason for it was that our state was so optimistic with our ability to have industry here, to have mining extraction, jobs for the people. We knew that we had a great future in front of us, and it's just been on a steady decline for the last 50 years. And enough's enough. We know that we have the potential. We have the resources. What we've done is mismanaged that, and that mismanagement's got to come to an end. And we've got to make those hard choices and make them now, because you never make them during good economic times when the coffers are full of money. You have to make hard decisions just like you would in your household when times are tough.
Senator Craig Blair, our guest here on Eastern Panhandle Talk with Rob and Dave. You have time for a few more questions, Craig?
Sure.
Okay. So who got to the governor? What changed from making hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to the paltry amount of cuts he mentioned last night? I think was, $27 million or something to that effect. Who got to him?
I have no idea, and I'd prefer not to speculate on that, because if I did speculate, that could actually impede further progress into the future where the governor's office and the Senate and the House could work together.
Because he sounded like a businessman who's used to having to balance his books up to last night. And then all of a sudden, I started to read more about Nick Casey's influence on Governor Justice's, obviously he's got a prominent post there. And as he's talking last night, I'm thinking to myself, it sounds like to me, as I'm hearing this, that Nick Casey wrote most of this.
Well, I would probably defend Nick Casey in this case, and I'm going to use Nick Casey's own words. When he was on Hoppy's show, Nick was saying there was going to be $395 million to $606 million in potential cuts to the state. Now, those were Nick's words. He wasn't speaking for the governor, so I find it hard to believe that Nick, the chief of staff, would have that type of influence to backpedal the governor on that when he was using those words himself.
Well, he certainly caught a lot of people by surprise. And then we had Jason Delegate Barrett on last segment, and he said that word began to leak out around noon yesterday that this would be the approach taken as opposed to one which featured more cuts. So obviously you guys weren't totally caught blindsided as you were watching and listening last night. But I know those who weren't in the know with you folks certainly were caught by surprise.
Well, you're right, and it started leaking out even earlier than yesterday at noon. We had our suspicions on this, but what do you do?
How surprised were you when it started leaking out, Craig? Because I think up until yesterday, I think that you were, cautiously optimistic about a different budget presentation.
That's why I used that word. Even if I heard something coming out that they were saying, well, the governor's backpedaling, blah, 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 blah. No, I got to remain cautiously optimistic until I hear the words and see the numbers out of the governor's mouth himself. And then, that's where the disappointment sets in, that he doesn't seize the opportunity to be able to make the state that we all want to be able to survive and live in. And by the way, tear it up. Put 10 cents on the gallon on gasoline. Put another half a cent on. My people in the Eastern Panhandle can go to Virginia. They can go to Maryland and spend their money and not be confined to fog in the boiling pot of water that the rest of the state seems to be in. I think it's totally the wrong approach on how to handle that. Now, you eliminate the income tax. Now you got, revenue neutral tax change, but the 5 fastest growing states in the country don't have income tax.
As much as I can just speak for myself, if you put another dime on the gallon of gasoline in West Virginia, I don't think I would ever buy another tank of gasoline at any station in the state of West Virginia. I'm just confessing that because I'm out of the state often enough where I would never have to do that.
They don't seem to get that. The closer you get to the center of the state, the less likely they are to understand the economics or the border economics that we have to deal with. But again, as the listeners are sitting here, I've fought hard to be able to get our gas prices to where they're competitive with our surrounding states. And it's been a struggle, to say the least, but they should always keep in mind that you have something that many, many other people do not, and that is 10 minutes. You can be down the road and filling your gas tank up for is oftentimes 50 cents less a gallon.
Senator, we'll let you get to your next meeting. I know you've got one coming up here. We do appreciate your time this morning. Any final thoughts from you as to what's next on the Republican side regarding response to this?
I think I've shared a lot of that with you already. That I think most of us want to go in and find minimum $250 million of cuts that can be as painless as possible. And we can provide the flexibility, just like what I was talking about higher ed. We can go in there and provide flexibility to where these cuts will be less painful for them. And keep in mind that they've got foundations that have significant resources that can help them tide through these tough economic times as well. We're in this together. So that's my last words.
Craig, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. Take care.